May 1945. American troops physically encountered the material end of the SS logistics network. They inspected the Austrian complex. Infantrymen from the 11th Armored Division secured the perimeter. Unventilated gas chambers emitted a dense chemical odor. Hydrogen cyanide residue mixed with the active decomposition of unburied bodies. How did the complex administrator end up on his own electrified fence? The barrier functioned as a multi-directional trap. The answer lies in the architecture of the system. The patrol reached the inner wire. A naked man hung on the barrier. The top strands supported his folded torso. Limbs dangled parallel to the steel mesh. This was Franz Ziereis. He operated this specific facility for 6 years. Red paint coated his bare back. Surviving prisoners smeared a swastika across his skin. They wrote 2 words between his shoulder blades: Heil Hitler. His flesh maintained direct physical contact with the metal. Standard voltage for SS electrified fences ranged from 380 to 1,000 volts. The generator stood silent. While the physical barrier remained intact, the internal extermination grid completely collapsed under the Allied advance. Mauthausen operated as a Class 3 camp. Maximum security, 0 release. Ziereis died in May 1945, but the infrastructure holding his corpse began calibration much earlier. SS engineers mapped the initial granite quarries in 1938. A United States Army photographer raised his camera and captured the dead commandant on the steel wire. The hardware that killed the commandant in 1945 did not materialize out of nowhere. Its infrastructure began calibrating in Vienna on March 12, 1938. The initial border crossing simulated a frictionless administrative transfer. German columns rolled forward. Austrian civilians threw flowers. But behind the parade formations, a secondary kinetic protocol activated. The targets lost their exit routes. The borders sealed shut. In Vienna, the subsequent violence registered as spontaneous mob chaos. Local operatives dragged Jewish citizens into broad daylight. Targets scrubbed cobblestones barehanded. Bystanders documented the degradation with personal cameras. Assailants applied blunt force trauma with leather belts. The disorder was an illusion. The SS deployed these public assaults as a strict primary stress test for the new terror apparatus. Intelligence units monitored the streets. They precisely measured the population's tolerance threshold for open brutality before launching conveyor belt deportations. The analytical data confirmed absolute compliance. The state mechanism advanced from street-level operations to industrial processing. A high-capacity containment zone became a logistical necessity. On August 8, 1938, SS administrators officially approved the geographical coordinates for the Mauthausen complex. By August 1938, the administrative machine required a new type of manager. Franz Ziereis positioned his family directly inside the perimeter of death. Where is the sanitary zone between the death conveyor and the bedroom? At Mauthausen, it physically did not exist. Standard SS protocols mandated strict environmental isolation for high-ranking officers. Camp administrators usually housed their families miles outside the electrified wire, utilizing natural terrain as a visual barrier against the atrocities. Ziereis rejected the blueprint. The commandant's private residence anchored itself deep inside the active compound. The topography merged. The dining room windows directly overlooked the primary holding blocks. Ziereis weaponized this proximity. He bypassed remote desk administration. He stepped off his porch and patrolled the sorting ramps. He directed the selections for the gas chambers. He executed prisoners by hand. Daily family routines absorbed the industrial slaughter. A continuous mechanical hum drifted from the quarry extraction zones. Suddenly, a sharp, dry rifle crack severed the low frequency. The shooter was his 11-year-old son. The boy took his firing position on the wooden veranda of the home. He braced the heavy weapon barrel against the railing. He aligned the iron sights. He tracked an exhausted inmate moving through the work grid below. He pulled the trigger. Ziereis actively supervised the protocol. Sniping at the forced labor pool functioned as legalized afternoon leisure. SS Command normalized this total psychological integration. A site manager required zero compartmentalization. Ziereis ate dinner, signed extermination rosters, and monitored his son's marksmanship from the exact same property. The physical gap between domestic comfort and mass murder collapsed completely. Within walking distance of that front door, the final body count stood at 95,000. While the commandant's family established their daily routine, the perimeter around them scaled into a transnational hub. The administrative machine prepared to process 197,000 human assets. The SS selected the exact site near Linz for its geological yield, a massive granite deposit. The raw material served a critical logistical requirement. Albert Speer demanded Mauthausen granite to supply the monumental construction projects planned for the center of Berlin. This specific quota integrated the isolated camp directly into the macroeconomy of the German Reich. To meet the new production targets, command transferred the 1st Labor Battalions from Dachau. Guards handed them shovels and pickaxes. The inmates excavated the bedrock. They constructed their own holding sectors, stone by stone. The industrial extraction rate required constant biological replenishment. Out of the 197,000 total inmates, 14,000 were Jewish. The supply chain absorbed Soviets, Poles, Spaniards, and Czechs from across the occupied territories. The rapid influx exceeded the primary perimeter capacity. In 1939, the SS activated a secondary extraction node just kilometers away. They named it Gusen. 2 isolated quarries merged into one lethal logistical system. The expanding infrastructure required centralized management. Franz Ziereis assumed direct operational control over the entire dual-camp network. The quarry pit was merely a foundation. To achieve industrial extermination scales, the SS deployed experimental protocols. How do you maximize mortality without the cost of gas? SS engineers used gravity and exhaustion. The official economic doctrine was extermination through labor. The system extracted maximum caloric output until the absolute biological failure of the human body. The primary mechanical instrument was a staircase, 186 steps cut directly into the earth. The SS carved the stone intentionally uneven. The total climb spanned 31 vertical meters. The physics of the ascent guaranteed structural collapse. An average starving prisoner weighed just 40 kilograms. Guards loaded a 50-kilogram granite block onto his back. The payload immediately exceeded the carrier's body weight. The center of gravity shifted violently upward and backward. A trembling foot blindly searched for the next jagged edge. Atrophied muscle fibers failed under the sheer vertical pressure. Equilibrium vanished. When one man dropped, kinetic energy took over. The falling body slammed backward into the prisoner below. That prisoner crushed the next in line. A biomechanical chain reaction swept down the narrow shaft. Heavy granite blocks scraped violently against raw stone. Bones snapped. The living column disintegrated. Those who reached the summit faced the parachutist's wall, a sheer cliff dropping back into the quarry pit. Guards forced the surviving column into a single line. The protocol offered a strict binary choice: take a bullet where you stand, or push the man ahead of you over the edge. Prisoners repeatedly stepped off the cliff themselves to avoid murdering an inmate. The guards called these drops parachute jumps. Edward Mossberg survived. He documented it all. The death infrastructure at the stairs evolved into an advanced experimental testing ground. A mathematically calculated calorie deficit became the primary control instrument. How do you turn a basic physiological need into a weapon of mass destruction? You engineer systemic starvation. Food ceased to be sustenance. It operated as a precise biological tool. Between 1940 and 1942, camp administration established a new physiological baseline. The average adult male prisoner weighed exactly 40 kilograms. By 1945, SS logisticians optimized the intake limit. Daily rations dropped to between 600 and 1,000 calories. This was not a supply chain failure. It was a targeted protocol. 600 calories equals the basal metabolic rate of a 1-year-old infant. Operating on this extreme deficit, a working adult body initiates an irreversible response and consumes its own muscles. At the quarry, inmates burned up to 4,000 calories daily. The mathematical gap forced total physiological collapse. This biological failure generated a spontaneous internal economy. Protein became the ultimate currency. Cannibalism functioned strictly as a localized black market. Demand dictated the rules. Supply arrived primarily during the freezing winter months. Inmates traded harvested human meat for other vital resources. Dying prisoners refused to sleep. They anticipated immediate tissue extraction from their still living bodies. These transactions left a permanent paper trail. Sworn survivor affidavits formally documented the exact operational mechanics of this underground flesh market. The paper trail of flesh documented mere baseline survival. While the general inmate population degraded to 40 kilograms, the medical block utilized survivors for targeted anatomical tests. An 18-year-old Jewish prisoner entered the facility with a minor foot infection. Erich Priebke initiated the surgical protocol. Orderlies secured the patient to the table. Straps locked his wrists. Priebke administered the anesthesia. He opened the abdomen. He extracted one healthy kidney. He performed immediate castration. Then came the decapitation. Priebke boiled the severed head in a concentrated chemical solvent. The flesh dissolved completely. The bare skull remained on his desk as a static anatomical trophy. Mauthausen operated as the only Category 3 camp in the Reich. Maximum severity. The entire perimeter functioned as a sterile testing ground. Extermination mechanics varied by department. Dr. Eduard Krebsbach specialized in chemical termination. His protocol required driving a syringe directly into the cardiac muscle. A sharp, acidic odor of phenol filled the examination room as the heart stopped. Outside, environmental stress tests ran simultaneously. SS guards stripped 3,000 inmates naked. They soaked the subjects with ice water. The men stood in Austrian winter temperatures of -10 degrees Celsius. Core temperatures plummeted until total biological failure. For rapid liquidation, engineers utilized the perimeter fence. The grid carried 380 volts. This output exceeded standard lethal electrical thresholds by more than 3 times, guaranteeing instantaneous cardiac arrest upon contact. Inside the surgical theater, operations routinely proceeded without painkillers. Observers assumed the ongoing frontline crisis caused a severe deficit of medical supplies. In reality, camp physicians deliberately withheld anesthesia to maintain the physiological purity of their shock data. Operating under these exact parameters, Dr. Hermann Richter methodically excised stomachs, livers, and kidneys from fully conscious prisoners to record the absolute maximum duration of human survival. By early 1945, the sterile testing facility faced a massive logistical failure. Command initiated the rapid evacuation of eastern camps, including Auschwitz and Gross-Rosen. What happens to a calibrated infrastructure of death during a total collapse of the front? It scales up. Transport convoys hit the Mauthausen rail spur. Freight cars ground to a halt with a heavy metallic screech. Guards kicked apart the frozen wooden boards. Tens of thousands of dying inmates poured into the deep winter snow. The camp population instantly breached maximum capacity. Resources vanished. Infrastructure failed. But the liquidation quotas remained strictly active. Instead of halting operations as the front shattered, the administration systematically maintained their exact execution schedules. On April 20th, SS officers purged the overloaded infirmary blocks. They extracted 3,000 sick patients. Guards executed the entire group immediately. The machine processed the backlog. The timeline shifted to April 28th. Allied armored columns advanced rapidly toward the main perimeter. The administration powered up the underground gas chamber for a final operational cycle. Guards locked the heavy steel doors. Exactly 1 week before the liberation forces breached the gates, the facility completed its final extermination task. The precise count of Austrian political prisoners methodically liquidated in that chamber stood at 33. During this exact window of total evidence erasure in late April, a critical hardware vulnerability compromised the camp system. 2,000 photographic negatives vanished from the secure data core. Boyks concealed the physical celluloid strips. He submerged them directly inside the official SS chemical reagent tanks. Francesc Boyks engineered the breach. The Spanish Civil War veteran operated the official SS photo lab. The darkroom air carried the pungent, acidic bite of developer and fixer. Boyks weaponized this sterile environment. He processed the daily operational film. He sorted the wet exposures on the glowing light table. Then he initiated the extraction protocol. He isolated the critical frames. He wrapped the dried celluloid in waterproof paper. He strapped the flat packages flush against his ribcage. He walked the evidence right past the security checkpoints. The spatial logistics required extreme precision. 2,000 negatives equal roughly 55 standard rolls of 36 frames. This exact volume demanded massive physical space for hidden storage. Boyks solved the mathematical limit by fragmenting the cache and smuggling it outward piece by piece. The SS infrastructure meticulously recorded its own operational crimes. The documentation survived the collapse. Nuremberg prosecutors projected the frames. The photographic evidence materialized on May 5, 1945. The advancing U.S. Army breached the perimeter. Over 80,000 surviving inmates remained alive inside the Mauthausen and Gusen complex. How fast does an engineered system of terror break? In Mauthausen, it required mere hours. The external power dynamic shifted. The primary control nodes, the SS guards, initiated an immediate withdrawal. The artificial hierarchy instantly failed. Capos lost their structural protection. These proxy enforcers had executed SS protocols in exchange for increased daily rations. Now they faced the general population without their armed sponsors. The response was not a chaotic emotional riot. It was a systematic physical dismantling of the control apparatus. Inmates isolated their targets inside the barracks. A Russian prisoner raised a solid wooden chair high overhead. He initiated a violent downward swing. The heavy wood made direct cranial contact. The capo collapsed. His body ceased all motor function. Survivors forced another capo headfirst into a water barrel. They held him submerged until his lungs flooded. A Polish inmate utilized a standard fixed blade. He drove the steel straight into a capo's sternum. A dull crunch of breaking bone echoed through the confined space. The kinetic force pushed the blade completely through the chest cavity, permanently pinning the man to the wooden bunk. The remaining SS guards failed to evacuate. The command structure inverted. The survivors redirected the camp infrastructure against its creators. Former SS guards carried heavy stones through the quarry under the strict control of the inmates. While inmates dismantled the camp hierarchy in the quarry, the architect of the system was already gone. On May 3, 1945, Franz Ziereis initiated his extraction protocol. He drove his family to a private hunting lodge near Spital an der Drau. The route covered 250 kilometers. That was the exact distance of his attempt to outrun the collapsing system. He stripped off his uniform. He put on civilian clothes. He waited. The camouflage failed. On May 23, 1945, former Polish prisoners attached to a U.S. Army unit spotted the commandant near the lodge. Ziereis broke cover. He ran. American soldiers opened fire. The ballistics were terminal. One bullet shattered his upper left arm. The second round entered his back. The projectile punched through his lung tissue, ruptured his stomach, and exited straight through his torso. Troops transported the bleeding fugitive back to his own infrastructure. They placed him in the former camp hospital at Gusen. The ward smelled heavily of fresh blood and sharp military medications. For 6 hours, the dying man delivered a precise bureaucratic debrief. He detailed the mechanics of freezing executions. He confirmed the medical murders. He broke down the logistics of starvation. The administration did not starve inmates by accident. A regional leader ordered a mathematically calculated 50% cut in all prisoner food rations to redirect the calories to the Austrian civilian population. The interrogator logged the absolute chain of command into the final report. Ziereis explicitly named Heinrich Himmler, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, and Heinrich Müller as the direct authors of the operational directives. What was the actual capacity of the Mauthausen machine? Over 7 years, the SS drove almost 200,000 people through the gates. Orders from the High Command, documented in the hospital, converted into concrete mathematics between 1938 and 1945. 197,000 humans in the system versus 95,000 corpses. 95,000 dead. The metric equals the complete annihilation of a mid-sized European city of that era. The camp operated as a processing plant. Guards utilized multiple methods of elimination: gas chambers, calculated starvation, freezing protocols, firing squads, experimental trials. The death toll was no anomaly. It was the baseline industrial output. Franz Ziereis monitored the entire infrastructure. He supervised the daily extermination quota. The commandant maintained a quiet domestic routine just meters away from the slaughter. The commandant's son raised a rifle and practiced his aim from the porch of their comfortable home. Franz Ziereis never lived to see the official count of his 95,000 victims. On May 24, 1945, his biological functions ceased. He was 39 years old. The physical dismantling of his system began with his corpse. Polish and Russian former prisoners extracted the body from the morgue. They stripped it. They left only a single military bandage on the left arm. The prisoners dragged the remains to the perimeter of the Gusen camp. They hoisted the corpse onto a concrete fence post. The architect of the execution system hung suspended by his legs. His dead weight stretched against the exact same barbed wire he had used to exterminate others. The creator became biological waste on his own infrastructure. Bright red paint of swastikas ate into the pale, dead skin. Inmates smeared the words "Heil Hitler" across his bare back. The body remained on public display. Tissue breakdown accelerated under the open sky. For several days, the stench of decomposition saturated the perimeter. The exhibition stopped only when the physical decay became a severe environmental hazard. A United States Army officer issued a direct order to cut the rotting object down from the wire.